Thank you so much everyone for coming. I'm really looking forward to our chat tonight. I'm here to talk about all things rattlesnakes. So I entitled this presentation Fact, Fiction, and Fabulousness. I love having an audience of people who are rattlesnake curious. I speak to all kinds of groups about rattlesnakes, everything from docents and wildlife enthusiasts like yourself to construction workers and miners who are listening to me about rattlesnakes for safety issues only, but I convert even them, I like to think. And so I'm here tonight to talk about rattlesnakes. I'm going to talk for a while, but I'm certainly going to leave lots of time for Q&A because my experience has shown me that there's always lots of questions about rattlesnakes. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and begin. Okay, I wanted to start with one of the most important things that you need to learn, acknowledging that many of you probably have a lot of experience and already know this. Some of you maybe not so much. If you're doing things like talking to people at local parks, talking to your neighbors about snakes that come into their yards and etc., which is to differentiate between the gopher snake that you see on the left, which is a very, very common snake throughout California. It's basically everywhere in California, and it is a harmless snake, with the rattlesnake that you see on the right-hand side. Now, rattlesnakes are also completely harmless if we just stay away from them, but later on in the presentation, we'll talk about how, of course, really unfortunate accidents can and do happen where people are bitten, and a bite from a venomous rattlesnake, which rattlesnakes are the only dangerously venomous snakes in all of California, can be very dangerous. And so differentiating between these two, which for the first half of the talk, when I talk about these, you can see a little smiley face for the harmless, non-venomous gopher snake and a little skull and crossbones for the rattlesnake, even though, like I said, rattlesnakes do not want to bite us. I'll say that about 35,000 times tonight. Differentiating between these two requires some experience. So when I first was learning as a student, kind of up a little closer to you all at UC Berkeley, I would stop for a second when I saw one. I'm like, which one is that? Because they do look kind of similar. They also act kind of similar. Gopher snakes, when they're really stressed out, will try to convince you they're a rattlesnake. And it's their way of, evolutionarily speaking, trying to benefit from mimicking a rattlesnake. So they can actually normally they have the skinny heads like the one you're seeing right here, but when they're upset, they can spread their head bones out and make their head appear more triangular like a rattlesnake. So the head shape thing is not the best way to tell these snakes apart. You may have heard about like round pupils versus vertical pupils. That doesn't work either. That can change according to how much light there is. And other things. The main thing that you can do is the bottom one here is you can look at their tail. So if you can see the tail of a snake in California, the golden rule is that a snake with a pointy tail is completely and totally harmless to people, pets, and livestock, as you can see with this gopher snake down here. Rattlesnakes are never going to have a pointy tail, ever. They're going to have the typical rattle string, which I'll talk more about later, and I'll tell you what exactly that is, that we see right here. Or even babies are born with this button on the end of their tail. Now, baby buttons can't make a noise yet because, as you'll see in an upcoming slide, the noise comes from when rattlesnakes have two or more rattles that bang against each other when they shake their tails. Okay. But the point here is that the shape of the tail tells you a lot. And rattlesnakes, even if they had, a predator bite off the tip of their tail or a car run over the tip of their tail, some sort of permanent injury where they can't grow rattles, it's not going to be a pointy tail. It's going to be rounded, nubby tail. Maybe see that very occasionally. Okay. So before I go on, I did want to mention one more thing about gopher snakes. Is they will actually shake their tail sometimes when they're stressed out and rattle it just like a rattlesnake does. Well, they're not actually mimicking a rattlesnake in that sense. It turns out that almost any snake is going to shake its tail when it's stressed out. It's just that rattlesnakes ended up evolving this maraca on the end of it to really make a ruckus. So if you ever can't see the tail, then you have to go by, this kind of series of other characters, the differences in the scales and so on. And you should always exercise caution, never pick up a snake if you can't see its tail. If you do pick up a gopher snake and it bites in self-defense, nothing bad will happen to you. If it's a rattlesnake, something very bad could happen to you. So always keep that in mind as you're learning. At the end of the talk today, I will give you resources to be able to learn more about these two species of snakes and also California snakes in general. Okay, so speaking of California snakes, I wanted to spend a little time talking about the species of rattlesnake that you have up there in, the northern Central Coast and the South Bay. So you have one species of rattlesnake. It's called the Northern Pacific rattlesnake. And when you look at this range map from this awesome website, it's an online field guide called CaliforniaHerps.com, which I'll provide that link for you at the end of the talk too. What you see is that the name or the common name of this rattlesnake really just depends on whether you're talking about the species or the subspecies. So all three of these colored ones, right, the blue, the gold, and the red, represent subspecies of what most people consider to be a single species, the Western rattlesnake. And as you can see up there near the Bay Area, you have Northern Pacific rattlesnakes. And that's true all the way down to right about where I live in San Luis Obispo County. Just south of me, it transitions into the Southern Pacific rattlesnake. And that goes all the way down into Baja California. And then, of course, the Northern Pacific rattlesnake that we have all throughout the Central Valley, all up through the Bay Area, goes all the way up through Oregon, Washington, and into Southern British Columbia. If you're ever going over to the east side of the Sierra, you would see Great Basin rattlesnakes. And then, of course, this green area that you're seeing, that doesn't mean there's no rattlesnakes. It just means there's none of this species. There's additional species, in fact, quite a few of them that occur in the Mojave Desert. Okay, so this Northern Pacific rattlesnake that you're looking at may look familiar to you. Some of the rattlesnakes that you've been lucky enough to see in the South Bay may look like that rattlesnake, but they may not. They may look really different from that. And this is because the physical appearance of Northern Pacific rattlesnakes varies tremendously throughout their range. And I should say, you know, this really should be called Western rattlesnake variation, because you're looking at, for example, a Great Basin rattlesnake up here on the top right. You're looking at here, this is what a Northern Pacific rattlesnake looks like on the right-hand side over here, like in Fresno. This yellow snake on the bottom right is a kind of special and very much looked for by people who like the rattlesnakes. Variant of the Northern Pacific rattlesnake in the Carrizo Plain inland right about here where I live. And then, of course, over here on the left, you can see the top left is something that looks a little more like the true Northern California, Northern Pacific rattlesnakes, and this beautiful all-black rattlesnake from Montana de Oro State Park. So they really do vary a lot. If you've ever heard a rumor that, oh, there's Mojave rattlesnakes over near the coast because someone has seen a rattlesnake that might look greenish, so they call it a Mojave green, that's actually false. Mojave rattlesnakes are a different species of rattlesnake that only occur over here in the Mojave rattlesnake. And if someone sees a greenish rattlesnake, it's just because it's a greenish Northern Pacific rattlesnake. So it really just is that one kind. Okay, so here we have a gopher snake. So mad. Trying to convince you it's a rattlesnake. This really is a bull snake mimicking a rattlesnake. Or glottis, sounds like a rat. Sorry, I had meant to mute that video and forgot. So I know it's hard to hear me with the guy talking over me. But that was to show you the gopher snake trying to act like a rattlesnake. And they even will make a rattling noise as they kind of hiss. So it really is tricky. You have to look for that tail. Okay, so here's a little bit more information about that rattlesnake rattle. Rattlesnake rattles are a fascinating evolutionary adaptation. It's one of the few animals that has a purely defensive structure. And the rattlesnake rattles are made of keratin, just like our fingernails. They're born with that birth button, and every time the snake sheds, it's going to be making a new rattle segment. And so the one that it's making is going to be the one that's attached to its tail, which means that the ones that you see that are further out represent older rattle segments that it made previously. And we can tell a lot about the age of a rattlesnake based on its rattle string, but we can't necessarily say exactly how old it is. And that is for two reasons. The first reason is that rattlesnakes don't necessarily shed once per year. In fact, young snakes, like this snake when it was born or the first couple years thereafter, is very frequently going to shed twice or more in that year. And then secondly, it's because rattles, just like our fingernails, can break off, meaning that we can't count them anymore. But we can look at things like how much this tapers, right? When the rattlesnake makes a new rattle, it's going to be the same width as its tail at the time it grows that rattle, which means that a few years ago, when this snake shed this rattle, it was a little guy and it had a much smaller rattle. So we can look at this snake and we can recognize, okay, this is a young snake. It's probably just a few years old, maybe to 5 years old, somewhere in there. In contrast, if you see a rattle where it's not tapered, it's even on each side, maybe broken off at the end, then you know that's a real old guy. And rattlesnakes can actually live for decades. They routinely will live over 10 years, even over 20 years. And then in captivity, or if a snake's really lucky and isn't eaten by something in the wild, they can live for 30 or 40 years, or actually the record rattlesnake in the wild is known to be over 55 years old. So truly, truly amazing long-lived animals if they don't get eaten by a predator, which you're going to see some photos of later on. Okay, so what makes the rattlesnakes rattle? Well, it's not hollow like a baby rattle. It's actually what you're seeing on the outside with each one of these segments. It's just a piece of it. they actually kind of, after they groove inward, they loosely interlock to the segment beyond it. And it's truly a beautiful thing to see. This is what it looks like if we take kind of a section through that rattlesnake rattle. This is a model of a rattlesnake rattle. Rattlesnake rattles never get this big, of course, they're much smaller than that. You can see if you follow along, say this rattle, what we see on the outside, we see it actually has these two loosely connected divisions that go on. And I think it's just a beautiful thing to look at. So fun fact is that the rattlesnake tail shaker muscle is a specialized muscle that can contract faster than almost any other muscle known in the animal kingdom. And it contracts 4 times faster than hummingbird wings can beat. And what that does is it causes those rattle segments to bang against each other and give that high-pitched buzzing noise that tells us, hey, back off. I don't want to waste my venom on you. My venom is made for the rodents that I thrive on. Okay, so now I'm going to go through a year in the life of a Northern Pacific rattlesnake and talk a little bit about the 2 main things that drive their behavior, which is reproduction and mating and feeding, mating and feeding. Okay, so let's go ahead and start over here in the autumn because that's where we are. We're in the autumn and sadly soon to be transitioning into the winter, at least as far as rattlesnakes are concerned, because rattlesnake activity is strongly constrained by weather, temperature. In the autumn, the snakes are going to be slowly right now kind of seeking out their winter hibernacula. And we are right at the end of the autumn mating season. So in the autumn mating season, as you're seeing on the top right here, we can sometimes see 2 rattlesnakes together. Rattlesnakes typically are solitary animals, but if you see 2 of them together, like this top right, you might recognize that those snakes are trying to mate. So for example, this big male on the top right has his head on the female. I know he's the male because the males are huge and the females are small. Okay. And so he's attentively waiting for her to try to get her to mate with him. And if he's lucky and they get to mate, this is what it will look like on the top right. These 2 rattlesnakes are actually connected. So male rattlesnakes have, fun fact, 2 penises. In fact, all snakes and lizards have 2 penises. And he'll use one at a time, insert it into the female, and they'll remain what we call locked up, oftentimes for hours with a very slow transfer of semen. So seeing rattlesnakes actually mating is extremely rare. Seeing him sitting there and trying to mate with her, including wrapping his tail around hers, is very common. After that mating season, she's not going to give birth to babies right away. She's going to store the sperm until the following spring. And in fact, she can actually store it for years. And rattlesnakes have the vertebrate record for long-term sperm storage, which is 6 years. Actually, it's a few days short, 6 years. And it could be longer. We just haven't found out yet. After that fall mating season, the snakes are going to go into what we call hibernation, and they'll be going underground. So it can range from underneath the ground in a squirrel burrow where they'll just hang out by themselves. Or if you're in an area, especially an inland area where it gets colder and there's big rocky outcrops, they love to gather, sometimes communally, in these dens and rocky outcrops. They will basically stay quiescent underground from typically early November through about early to mid-March. But it really, timing of that hibernation really depends on the weather. So on the coast where it might be more mild, you might see snakes active all year round. Their activity just goes down in the winter. They're not cruising around much, but they can be seen above ground. Whereas inland where it's colder, or as we go further up north, snakes are not going to be seen at all. Up in the Sierra Nevada, snakes have a very short, almost summer only active season, maybe the late spring to the early fall. So it really depends. And then when they wake up in spring, all hell breaks loose because that's the main mating season for rattlesnakes. That's when you're seeing them moving around. That's when you're most likely to see them crawling around on roads. And that's because the testosterone levels spike in the males. They're looking for females. And as you can see, it's often common to find them together. Again, the male's hanging out trying to get her to mate with him. So they might mate in the fall. They might mate in the spring. She might have mated with multiple males from years before. And so when she becomes pregnant, and this is a true pregnancy, because rattlesnakes only give live birth, there's no such thing as a rattlesnake egg, she can be pregnant with multiple fetuses, and they can have different fathers because of the fact that she stored different sperm. And all summer long, she's going to be pregnant. And her pregnancy with, anywhere from 3 to 15 or so offspring, usually it's going to be closer to, 8, 9, somewhere in there as an average, is going to be marked by her being kind of hanging out, not moving around, not eating very much, and sometimes hanging out with multiple other snakes. So if you look on the top left, this is a picture of a rookery, which is a communal nesting area for female rattlesnakes. Now, usually female rattlesnakes just give birth on their own, maybe in a squirrel burrow. Excuse me. But sometimes they get together. And if you look really carefully, you'll see little baby rattlesnakes curled up and hanging out. with these adult females. And the cool thing that we have figured out about these is that those fat adult pregnant females are babysitting the new babies of a different female while she goes and hunts. So they have really complex social behavior, which I'll mention later on. The birthing occurs, the peak birthing of these snakes occurs in July through October, with the main season being late August to early September. And indeed, the mother rattlesnakes, or sometimes these pregnant rattlesnakes, will hang out with the babies and protect them for a short period of time. So they really do have this amazing adult attendance of the babies. Meanwhile, any female rattlesnake who's not pregnant that year, which honestly, the females only give birth every 2 to 3 years. And then also any males are going to be hunting all summer long. So hunting and doing things like eating California ground squirrels, which is their favorite food. In addition, they eat wood rats, deer mice, kangaroo rats, all kinds of other types of rodent food. Rodents are their main food. I'll show you some photos of that later on. And then that all goes back around to the fall and it all starts up over again. So everything really is ruled by this desire to mate and this desire to get food and be able to use that food as energy to mate. Really just like any other animal. Okay, moving on then. All right, so I'm going to show you an ultrasound, and this is going to be animated in just a minute to show you what it looks like when you have a pregnant female rattlesnake. So I believe that this was taken in June, and what you're looking at is a single egg, because they do have eggs, they just don't lay them, and they don't have big eggshells on them. They keep them inside their bodies. And this white part that you're seeing is the yolk, whereas this little curled up thing is the spinal column that you're seeing of the fetal rattlesnake. So as we move the ultrasound wand back and forth, you can see different parts of this fetal rattlesnake appearing. And this is an early fetus because it still is going to absorb much of that yolk through its umbilical cord, which they do have, and grow. And so by the time it's ready to be born, it'll fill up this whole amniotic sac, just like a human baby would, and there'll be very little yolk left. And one of the neat things you can see here is we can actually see the beating heart of a baby rattlesnake right there, even long before it's going to be born. So we can use this ultrasound like I did here at the Cal Poly Vet Clinic to learn all kinds of things about how far along she is, how many babies she's going to have, and so on. And then when she does have the babies, this is what it looks like. So this is very exciting. This is from Project Rattlecam that Dylan was talking about. This is the first ever footage of a live wild rattlesnake giving birth in real time. So we were watching this on YouTube, and this is a live snake. It's black and white because it was at nighttime, so the camera switches to infrared. During the daytime, it's color. And we can see this mother rattlesnake in a crevice pushing out her baby rattlesnakes. Absolutely fascinating. The crickets come along, and the crickets are trying to drink some of the amniotic fluid, maybe trying to eat the sac. So you can see in the background some of the babies that were just born. And then what I want you to see in just a minute, something that's really neat, is this next baby that's coming out. It's inside its amniotic sac, and its umbilical cord is going to rupture, and then it needs to start breathing on its own, right? Just like any other animal. And so we actually got to see this right here. Watch its little snout right there as it breaks through the amniotic sac and takes its first breath. Ah, amazing. So that one of the really exciting things about this was that we'd only ever seen this in captivity. And we got to watch this on the first ever live streaming camera installed on a rattlesnake den. So this is the same mom. She moved, and it was almost as though she knew the camera was there. She doesn't. And she just moved so that we could so easily see her give birth to the next pup. Rattlesnake babies are called pups. Like I said, they have umbilical cords, which will eventually fall off, and they will have belly buttons. They're truly adorable little animals. Okay, so moving on from that. This is what it looks like a couple days later when we're talking about that parental attendance. This photo is of Thea, one of the female rattlesnakes on the Project Rattlecam site. Incidentally, I should mention that this picture and the footage from the previous slide are not from California. They're from Colorado, where we have a rattlesnake camera that monitors a prairie rattlesnake megaden. So this is a different species entirely. This is a species that's closely related to the Northern Pacific rattlesnake. We also have a camera on a Northern Pacific rattlesnake den, but it's not nearly as many snakes, and it's not quite as exciting as this one. What you're looking at is Thea, one of the named snakes, because the community scientists who watch the stream all day long can name the snakes because they can recognize unique pattern. Like, for example, look at how her pattern has these two blotches right here and this strange shaped blotch. So Thea is a pregnant rattlesnake who's hanging out here and potentially protecting someone else's babies, which I think is really, really, really cool. Thea is, and this picture was one of the photos that we had in our 2025 Project Rattlecam calendar, which is pretty awesome. We just started doing pre-orders for our 2026 calendar. So if that's something you want, or if you want to get it as a holiday gift for somebody, remind me later to tell you how to get that, because all of those proceeds support our research. Okay, I wanted to move into the section where we talk about why rattlesnakes are important. Now, sometimes as docents or as, talking to your neighbors, talking to your kids, whatever, whoever you're talking to, sometimes people would ask, well, who cares about rattlesnakes? And I've heard everything. I've heard people say, I thought I was supposed to kill rattlesnakes. People just don't know, because rattlesnakes are probably the most maligned wildlife that we have here in California, unfairly maligned as well, as you're going to hear soon. So I'm going to be giving you a few talking points about how you can answer those questions about why we should care about rattlesnakes. And the first one is that rattlesnakes are really important parts of the ecosystem. This is kind of a general California food web. It's very simplified. But what I want to show you here is that rattlesnakes are what we call mesopredators, meaning they both eat these herbivores, rodents like California ground squirrels and kangaroo rats, but then they also provide an important food source for our top predators, things like hawks and owls, coyotes, bobcats, mountain lions, badgers, you name it. And so what these rattlesnakes do is they concentrate this rodent energy into usable energy for those top predators. It's not very efficient for a mountain lion or even a hawk to just catch a bunch of little K-rats. That's a lot of effort for a very little caloric bang for your buck. Rattlesnakes are incredibly efficient at turning rodent energy into giant snake sausage that can then be eaten by these predators. So that's a really important role that they play. Now, these predators and rattlesnakes have really fascinating co-evolutionary relationships that we're just starting to learn about. So, for example, badgers seem to eat rattlesnakes without worrying about it at all. We have footage from some of our camera traps showing badgers eating rattlesnakes and just getting bit in the face over and over. They swell up, but they're totally fine. So rattlesnakes, badgers are believed to be resistant to rattlesnake venom. This is one of the famous photos I've ever seen, most favorite photos I've ever seen. It should be famous, it's not, which shows you clearly a rattlesnake that is in distress. It's on its back, what's going on? Well, if you look really carefully at this, you can see that there's another critter back here hiding in the bush. It's got a hold of it. And it's a California king snake. California king snakes are another non-venomous, harmless to people, pets, and livestock snake of California. And they're harmless unless you're a prey item for them. And they eat everything. They eat rodents, they eat birds, they eat lizards, they eat snakes, including rattlesnakes. And they're actually completely and totally immune to rattlesnake venom. We sat there and over several hours watched this California king snake kill, and it killed it by constriction because they don't have venom, and eat this rattlesnake that weighed about the same, it looked to weigh about the same amount as that king snake. So that would be like me eating a giant 150-pound hot dog all in one bite without using my hands, which I think is pretty impressive. So go king snakes. Birds, on the other hand, like this red-tailed hawk, are not resistant to rattlesnake venom. So when they go and catch a gopher snake, they'll just grab it. Whereas if they catch a rattlesnake, they're actually going to rip off the business end first. Here's a headless rattlesnake that this very smart adult is taking to its incredibly cute little baby for it to eat. So again, providing this really important food source there for all these top predators. And then rattlesnakes, of course, use venom to kill their own prey, right? So we're going to talk about venom quite a bit here, about what it is and what it does. I'm also going to be at the end talking about rattlesnake bites to people and what the venom does to people. So first and foremost, rattlesnake venom is an evolutionary adaptation that is designed to kill and perhaps tenderize the prey that they eat. It's secondarily used for defense. The primary use is for prey. Rattlesnakes, like all vipers, have paired venom sacs along the side of their head that you can see right here. That's what gives them that puffy triangle-shaped head. And inside that venom sac, there's a production of this complex cocktail of proteins, many different types of proteins. And those proteins are going to be delivered through this venom duct, which is then connected to the rattlesnake's fangs. The fangs are hollow, like hypodermic needles. And when the snake is at rest, they're folded upwards into the snake's mouth. And when the snake strikes, they fold outward and they basically stab the prey with them and then release. And the whole process is so fast that you would blink. If you blinked, you would miss it. And they inject that venom and they let go. And then that venom is going to eventually kill the prey, sometimes rapidly, sometimes it takes a while. And the prey will run off somewhere. Let's say it's a rodent, it will run off somewhere and it will die. And then the rattlesnake will find it and it will eat it. So rattlesnakes almost exclusively eat prey after it's already died. Okay, so what are some of the things that this venom is designed to do? Some of the things are that the venom is going to cause massive dysregulation of blood flow. So some of the proteins in the venom are anticoagulants, some of them are coagulants, and it just really messes up blood flow so that the animal's brain is instantly deprived of oxygen and it might die. It also might cause a lot of internal bleeding. In addition, there are myotoxins that are going to disrupt muscle activity. There, in some species, in some populations, are neurotoxins that might disrupt the ability for excitable tissues like neurons to function, or for muscles like your diaphragm or breathing muscle to be able to function. And then there's also cytotoxins or cell toxins that are going to start breaking down cells, possibly tenderizing that prey. And so this is really awesome for the rattlesnake because it helps it to kill and maybe, like I said, tenderize these little rodents that it wants to eat. It's not awesome if you're the rodent, of course, and it's also not awesome if you're a predator that gets bitten and if you don't have any resistance to that venom like our friend the badger did or the king snake did. And people don't have innate resistance to rattlesnake venom. We don't have this long co-evolutionary relationship with rattlesnakes. And as a kind of a fun way of thinking about that, I want you to think about the fact that the ancestors of the kangaroo rats that the rattlesnakes eat, or the ancestors of the badgers that eat the rattlesnakes, those have co-evolved with rattlesnakes in this intricate evolutionary dance for as long as rattlesnakes have been around, which is at least 14 million years. Rattlesnakes evolved in the Western Hemisphere, which is the only place they live. So there's been a lot of time for this evolutionary arms race by natural selection, where a rattlesnake on accident, just by mutation, evolves a more complex and more deadly venom, and then it kills off much of its prey. But then the one prey that has a mutation that makes it resistant is the one that has all the babies, and then so on and so forth. Evolutionary arms race. People have only been in, the Americas for maybe 15,000 years, not very long at all. So we do not have the evolutionary history that gives us any resistance to rattlesnake venom. All right. So speaking of resistance to rattlesnake venom, it's not just the badgers that have it or the king snakes. It's not the predators. It can be the prey as well. You're looking at a rattlesnake, a Northern Pacific rattlesnake, eating a adult California ground squirrel, which is its favorite food. So California ground squirrels obviously can be killed by rattlesnake venom. Obviously are eaten pretty regularly, but sometimes they can survive. Sometimes a tiny little ground squirrel can actually survive a full-on envenomation by an adult rattlesnake. And that's because they too have that complex co-evolutionary relationship with rattlesnakes. I just think that's really cool. And so what that means is that California ground squirrels can sometimes be really, I don't know what the word would be, brave around rattlesnakes. They get in their face and they can kind of kick dirt at them. Sometimes they shake their little tail because they're telling the rattlesnake, hey, get away from here. I already see you. You might as well not hunt where I am because I'm aware of you. Go try to sneak up on somebody else. And so this rattlesnake will oftentimes get up and leave. Really, really cool things that we're learning now about these relationships between rattlesnake predators and rattlesnakes prey. Okay, so this leads me into a related kind of the second reason that rattlesnakes are important. The first reason was the role they play in the ecosystem. The second reason was that because they eat so many of these rodents, which are what we call reservoirs, which means they harbor the bacteria that causes Lyme disease, they may actually play a role in reducing the risk of Lyme disease for people. And this has been demonstrated in the northeastern United States, where Lyme disease is very serious risk. It's actually spreading. And there's also additional rodent-borne diseases, including ones that are transmitted by ticks, like Lone Star ticks that cause this alpha-gal syndrome. We may have heard about that. If you haven't heard about alpha-gal syndrome, you need to read about it. It's an acquired meat allergy where a person, after being bitten by a Lone Star tick, will become allergic, like deathly allergic to eating any meat from mammals. So no more pork, no more beef. Really, really dramatic. But at any rate, not to get off on a side tangent, which I'm known to do, here's how this goes, for example, with Lyme disease. So we always think about ticks when we think about Lyme disease, and ticks do transfer the bacteria that causes Lyme disease from one host to another. But there has to be a host that's holding all those bacteria in its body. And those hosts oftentimes are these rodents like squirrels. And just by virtue of the fact that the rattlesnakes eat so many of these squirrels, they help to keep that reservoir of those bacteria under control. And in California, we're thinking about the fact that we have Lyme disease, not a lot, not compared to the Northeastern United States, but we certainly do have it, especially up in Northern California. So rattlesnakes probably play a role there, but they also play a role in other rodent-borne diseases, things like hantavirus, which has been in the news recently. And then, of course, one that, here, our footage that we just watched, California ground squirrels actually can carry a vector, fleas in this case, we think, that transmits the plague, as in literally the bubonic plague, which caused the Black Death in the Middle Ages. That is endemic to California now, and every year there's an outbreak where people are getting the plague. And luckily, there's antibiotics still that can treat that. So the point here is that if we didn't have rattlesnakes, we would have a lot more squirrels and potentially a lot more plague, and everyone gets my point. Okay, so that's the second reason. The third reason, and the final reason that I'm going to give you, is one that you may not have heard about, which is this very bold statement that I'm making at the top here, which is that in the United States, snake venoms actually save more human lives than they take. There's kind of two pieces of this to unpack. The first one is that the snake venoms are saving lives, and that's because of these drugs that are inspired by snake venoms. I'm going to tell you an example in just a moment. But the second part is that it's very rare for a rattlesnake to actually take a human life anymore, and that is because we have such good treatment for rattlesnake envenomations. Now, think about your, parents or grandparents. Maybe if they were around before the 1950s, before anti-venom was developed, they might have had a very different psychological relationship with snakes, because a rattlesnake bite could be more likely to be deadly or at least cause a disabling injury. But nowadays, that's just not true, at least in the United States. Okay, so let's take a look really quickly here at this eptifibatide. Is a great example. Eptifibatide is a protein that comes from pygmy rattlesnake venom. That's a species that's over in Florida. And eptifibatide is a very strong and specific anticoagulant. So the rattlesnake uses it to disrupt blood flow in its prey. But what the pharmaceutical company did that made it was developed it to be used to help treat people who had stents put into their coronary arteries following a heart attack. And on stents, a big risk is that a blood clot might form. And so by virtue of using this highly specific anticoagulant that prevents blood clots from forming, thereby saving people's lives. And that's just one example. There's multiple other examples. And right now, long past this timeline that you're looking at here, we're in a kind of revolution right now of people using artificial intelligence and machine learning to design, test, and eventually develop the drugs that are based on other types of snake venoms. And of course, other animals in general. Just for fun, if you see this one down here on lizards in the bottom right, that's from Gila monsters, which are one of the world's only venomous lizards. And back in 2005, exenatide came on the market, which was the first Gila monster derived venom, and it's Gila monster derived venom component that was used as a drug. And that was the very first GLP-1 agonist, which, as you know now, is being used as Wegovy and Manjaro, right? All of those drugs that are being used to treat type 2 diabetes and obesity. And so the exenatide was the very first type 2 diabetes drug derived from an animal venom. So we have Gila monster venom to originally thank for those GLP-1 agonists. But this is about rattlesnakes, not Gila monsters. So let's go on. Okay, so I chose for you a photo of a snake bite that isn't terrible. Some of the talks that I give and the trainings that I give in person, which incidentally I do snake handling training statewide for everything from biologists to military personnel to construction workers, you name it. I'll show worse photos to those ones because I really want to impress upon people who are going to be handling snakes as part of their jobs how important it is to stay out of the way of rattlesnakes. So in the whole country, there's about 8,000 bites by venomous snakes, and most of those are not rattlesnakes. Most of those are actually venomous copperhead snakes and cottonmouth snakes, which don't occur in California. And so if we actually look in California, there's maybe about 500 rattlesnake bites per year. Certainly that varies per year. And on average, there's less than one death per year. Some years there's one, some years there's two, but it really just depends. There's only about 5 on average in the whole country per year. Now, most people do recover fully because they get treated in the hospital, especially if they get treated quickly with anti-venom. And anti-venom treatment is wonderful. It is life-saving. It is absolutely necessary for someone to save their lives or to prevent morbidity, which could be losing a finger or losing the use of a finger, or even losing a whole limb like an arm. But it's very, very, very expensive. So if the photos here and the mild photo that I showed you, and the risk of life and limb isn't enough to scare people away from messing with snakes, which can oftentimes lead to bites, then hopefully the amount of the bill can. People who are uninsured or underinsured can easily go bankrupt from a rattlesnake bite, which routinely costs over $100,000. And it's now not uncommon for them to cost over $500,000. And I've even heard of some of them being over $1 million. And that is because the antivenom is very expensive to make. And it's also because of the high cost of pharmaceuticals in our country. Antivenom from rattlesnakes is briefly, it is made by taking a bunch of snakes that are all kept in captivity. So this is not people going out and collecting venom in the wild. That's not a thing, at least not for antivenom production. And they're milking those snakes, and then they're injecting tiny amounts of venom into either horses or into sheep. And those animals' bodies are really good at developing antibodies against the proteins in those complex venoms. And then the scientists can go in and draw a small sample of blood from those horses or sheep, purify that, and then you have your antivenom. It's basically a bunch of the antidote, a bunch of these antibodies against the toxic snake venom components. That is going to be kept in a refrigerator at a hospital, and it's delivered IV under the watchful eye of an ER doctor and a toxicologist. So it's not like an EpiPen that someone can carry with them and deliver in the backcountry. Nope, treatment all has to be done in the hospital. And of course, there's a lot more to it than that. I'm glad to answer any questions later on. Here is some important snake bite do's and don'ts. In the unlikely event that you ever know someone who's bitten by a rattlesnake, you should just forget all the things that you may have seen on TV. Things like tourniquets. It's an absolute no-no for a rattlesnake bite. These next two are, these pressure mobilization or lymphatic bandages that in some cases can be useful in treating snake bites in other countries like Australia. Absolutely not with rattlesnakes. And that's because you don't want to be keeping the venom in the affected limb. The idea is that if the venom is kept by, for example, a tourniquet in the affected limb, that it's concentrated in that limb. You're not letting it dilute out into the rest of the body. And then all that venom that has all of those effects can really be eating away at that limb. And that's not what you want. You want to allow it to dilute into your body so that it's present at lower concentrations. You may have heard of cutting and sucking the wound. Nope, that was just only ever in a Western film. You may have seen these military issued, and you can also buy them on Amazon, but please don't. Suction devices, they're supposed to suck the venom out. They don't do that. Electrical stimulation, I mean, that one just blows my mind. Apparently, some people think that using a taser, or even worse, connecting themselves to their car battery and turning it on, oh my God, is somehow supposed to neutralize the venom. It doesn't. No ice, no heat, just don't do anything. Literally the only thing to do is to call 911 to arrange for an ambulance to take the person to the nearest hospital. Or if in the backcountry, if you can't get to the hospital in the next hour or two, then to call for a medevac helicopter. What snakebite treatment physicians say is time is tissue, meaning the longer that you wait to go to the hospital, the more of a chance there is that there could be tissue damage that could be long lasting, even permanent. It's not like it is on TV where someone's bitten by a rattlesnake and they take 2 steps and they die. That's not how rattlesnake venoms work, usually, unless someone has a very rare allergic reaction to it. Usually, and in the past, before we had antivenom, if someone was going to die from a rattlesnake bite, it probably would have happened over days of agony, maybe even secondary infection. Okay. So you have time to get to the hospital, but use as little time as possible. Never drive yourself to the hospital. Always get there as quick as possible. Regarding the call 911 thing, some people have a common question that I get is, well, what happens if the bite is in the backcountry and you don't have cell service? Well, I'm here to tell you all that there's no excuse for that anymore. You should always have some way of getting an emergency signal in the backcountry. And that is because most of our modern cell phones have an SOS signal. So all of you should learn how to do it. You're probably more likely to have to use it for something other than a rattlesnake bite, maybe like a broken leg when you're out hiking or a hunting accident or something like that. The point is that most of our devices can now communicate from anywhere on the planet, and that's only going to get more and more common. If for some reason you don't have that, people who are out in the backcountry regularly should have like a spot GPS or a satellite phone, some other way of getting in touch. Okay, The only things that are needed, in addition to calling the ambulance, is to take off any jewelry. So there's going to be massive swelling that will occur pretty quickly. So taking off things like rings, watches, those types of things can be really helpful in preventing a problem when the limbs swell. And then this one's important on the bottom left is insisting once you get treatment on keeping that limb straightened and elevated. In terms of first aid, like in the field, it's okay to have the limb at heart level, but not below heart level, which some of you may have heard was the right way to do things. Well, it's changed in recent years. The official recommendation from the snakebite experts at National Snakebite Support, which is a nonprofit that supports proper treatment of snakebite, says now we need to keep them at heart level or above heart level, but then very importantly, no matter what, during treatment, above heart level. Okay. Now, it may be something that might happen is when you're out in the park, it could be possible that someone's dog is bitten by a rattlesnake, or someone that you know, or even hopefully not your own dog. If there's a rattlesnake that visits the yard, they might get bitten. And snake bites to dogs are much more common and unfortunately much more lethal than they are for people. And that's because when a person sees a rattlesnake, they're usually going to back away. When a rattlesnake sees a rattlesnake, excuse me, when a dog sees a rattlesnake, even if it's rattling in defense, the most common reaction by a dog is to sniff it and to get its face down there. And of course, the dog ends up getting bit in the face by the rattlesnake. And these are devastating injuries. The same thing goes with dog bites. Rattlesnake bites to dogs is that they require antivenom. You need to go to the emergency veterinarian. So there's a lot of misinformation out there, even unfortunately among veterinarians. And that's because the treatment guidelines have changed in recent years. And so unless that veterinarian is participating in continuing education, they may not be aware of these changes. So here is the guidelines to preventing this from happening to your best friend right here on the right-hand side. Incidentally, there's like 30,000 dog bites a year from rattlesnakes, which is a lot, which is using a leash. I cannot stress the importance of using a leash in your parks and on the wild anyway. That's going to protect your dog from rattlesnakes, but also from poison oak and ticks. It's going to protect the wildlife in the parks from the dogs. It's just a really good thing to do. Strongly recommend taking your dog to a rattlesnake aversion training class. There are reputable trainers, and then there's ones that aren't so good. So spend some time looking for a reputable trainer. I can provide a recommendation of a company that I hire every year to come and train my clients. They travel throughout California every year. It's a really great way to teach your dog to back away from the sight, smell, and sound of a rattlesnake instead of engaging with it. The rattlesnake vaccine, which is a shot that is given by veterinarians that is allegedly supposed to give your dog more time, doesn't work. There's no evidence that it works at all. So I tell people to avoid it, and it is not recommended by the veterinarians at National Snakebite Support. And then if a bite occurs, then you go to the hospital with your dog, go to the pet hospital, say yes to antivenom for your dog, opioid medication that is going to be treating the dog's pain, and then if required, fluids, but say no to everything else. So Benadryl doesn't work, steroid treatment doesn't work, prophylactic antibiotics doesn't work, etc. And if you go to National Snakebite Support website, they have really awesome materials that you can bring in with you to your veterinarian or even to your ear doctor. If you're in a place, the same thing goes for people, by the way. If you're in a place that doesn't get very many snake bites, it's possible the ER doctor may not be completely up on the current way to treat them. So National Snakebite Support can help. Okay, so I'm getting towards the end here of before we get to the Q&A. And so I wanted to go over some rattlesnake facts and fiction, and then provide you with some resources where you can learn more about not just rattlesnakes, but all California snakes. Turns out that the myths about rattlesnakes are very, very strong, very, very, very widespread out there. I've already kind of debunked a few of them, but let's go through some of the most common ones. So the most common myth or fiction is that rattlesnakes want to bite people. I think because of the way that rattlesnakes are portrayed in the media, where they're portrayed as kind of like laying in wait for us and they're just dying to bite us, it causes a lot of the fear that we see out there. It actually causes people to be fearful and maybe even have hate towards rattlesnakes. And unfortunately, that causes people to kill rattlesnakes, which is a tragedy. The truth is that rattlesnakes are super shy. They only bite in self-defense. Rattlesnakes do not want to waste that venom that they have to spend energy to make on you. They want to use it on the rodents. The biggest myth out there by far is that bites from baby rattlesnakes are more dangerous than bites from adults. This bite takes many, many forms. Things like, oh, well, baby rattlesnakes can't control their venom, so they inject more. That's the most common one I hear. But that's absolutely not true. They can control their venom, And on average, bites from adult rattlesnakes are more dangerous than bites from babies because bites from adults inject more venom. So baby rattlesnakes do have venom. Bites from any rattlesnake, no matter its size, are a medical emergency. But on average, bites from adults are more dangerous than bites from babies. This is a newer myth that has been gaining traction that I love to bust whenever I can, because this myth irritates me because it's not true. People are saying that rattlesnakes are evolving to rattle less frequently. And the story goes here that over time, rattlesnakes that give away their presence in the bush by rattling are going to be detected maybe by people who will then go and kill them, or I've heard by hogs, by pigs, which will go and kill them, whatever, you name it. In other words, that the rattle, which is an evolutionary defense, is starting to give away those snakes. And so if you actually kill those snakes, then the snakes that was more likely to rattle is not going to pass on those genes for rattling to its babies. And then therefore only the ones that don't rattle are going to live and pass on those genes and so on. So it sounds like a plausible hypothesis, but we have zero evidence for it. And in fact, what's really happening is that rattlesnakes just don't rattle very often. Rattlesnakes are actually really reluctant to give themselves away unless they've been cornered already. The first line of defense of a rattlesnake is camouflage. It's going to sit there curled up, and many of you have seen this. You've walked by a rattlesnake and it never said anything. That's how they talk, is with their rattle. It never said anything to you. And then it's only if you poke at it or prod at it, and I'm here to tell you that not even then, and you shouldn't poke and prod at rattlesnakes, just saying that like that's what will get them to rattle. Okay. And they never have. So what happened is that someone said this once, and then when the next time someone who heard that rumor saw a rattlesnake, the rattlesnake, guess what? It didn't rattle. And so it fed into that confirmation bias that then made people think, okay, well, this one, look, it's evolving to rattle less frequently. The reality is that it would take many, many thousands of generations for that type of selective pressure to happen to cause a rattlesnake to rattle less. And also, we don't even know if the propensity to rattle is heritable. We don't even know that. So it's not happening. It's a myth. And then, of course, I've already told you about all the different myths about snake bite, all those cut and suck myths, etc. But in the event of a snake bite, nothing should be done to the wound. You should just get to the hospital. Okay. So hopefully in this presentation, I have convinced you that rattlesnakes are these really cool animals, that they have these really complex social lives. We're learning that they have friends and family members that they visit each year. And it's really a tragedy when people kill them out of ignorance. And because, I mean, we're here in October, it's spooky season. My husband and I are watching scary movies in, weekends. We like to be scared, right? Being scared sells. It gets clicks and likes. And so if people show rattlesnakes acting terrifyingly, it gets people's attention. And that's why they do it. And that's why we see this sensationalist language about rattlesnakes, because the truth is actually a lot more boring, or at least in this context, it is that rattlesnakes are just shy. So hopefully that you can join me in spreading the good word about rattlesnakes. To learn more about California rattlesnakes, we have a few awesome resources. The first one is called CaliforniaHerps.com. And CaliforniaHerps.com is that awesome online website where you can learn about all amphibians and reptiles of California. The second one is, I'm here to tell you folks that there's a must-get book called California Amphibians and Reptiles. It is by Bob Hansen and Jackson Shedd, and it is a in-depth field guide to the amphibians and reptiles of California. Why is this such a big deal? Because it's our first good one that we've ever had just for California. And it has every bit of information, how to key out every of the 200 or so species of amphibians and reptiles that we have. And the third one is by yours truly, California Snakes and How to Find Them by Heyday Books up there in Berkeley. So this is my book. It came out last year. And this is a compact field guide that is not technical. So this is written in a way that's more storytelling. I wanted to write a book that was accessible to people who wanted to learn about snakes in a way that was fun. Instead of a reference material, it was really fun. It also tells you, as you might see there, how to find each species of snake. And since this book came out in 2024, I have also published its sister book, California Lizards and How to Find Them. That one came out this year. And then, very exciting, in February, California Amphibians and How to Find Them also comes out. So it'll be a trilogy, maybe with more to come. We'll have to see. But I do encourage you to get those. And so if you want those books, you can order signed copies from me on my website, centralcoastsnakeservices.com, or you can get those books online or at your favorite local bookstore. I think they're also carried at REI. So do look out for those if you'd like those. Meanwhile, here's how you can get more information on the kind of things we do. You can follow us on social media. So Central Coast Snake Services is my local company here in San Luis Obispo and Santa Barbara counties, where we provide resources on all things snake. We remove and relocate rattlesnakes from people's yards here in the Central Coast for free. We do snake safety training. We do all kinds of stuff. In the middle there is my laboratory website, pearl.calpoly.edu. And that's where you can download our scientific publications. You can read about some of the things my graduate students are doing, etc. And the bottom is rattlecam.org, and that's where you can watch the rattlesnakes on the live stream. Of course, we are at the very end of rattlesnake season, so the California camera is going to be shut down this weekend because the last snakes left last week. The Colorado cam, there's a couple snakes out every day, but it's the very end of their season. We're starting to get snow there at night. But you can go to our YouTube channel and or to our website and look at archived footage. And it's pretty amazing, the kind of stuff that we see on there, all kinds of amazing interactions. And the best way to learn about that, of course, is to follow us on Instagram, X, or Facebook at Coast Snake, at Snaky Mama, or at Rattlecams to learn more. So look at this. I think it's the first time it's ever happened that I'm finishing exactly on the hour. I want to thank you all for listening, and I'm eager to take any and all of your questions. And thank you so much for spreading the good word about rattlesnakes.